Good. Welcome, everyone, on this very exciting session on decarbonizing transport sector through fiscal policies to facilitate the uptake of electric vehicles, to avoid lock-in effects on carbon intensive pathways, and as well to increase resilience against fossil fuel prices, and at the same time to reduce the environmental impact of the transport sector, especially in Asian countries. So I'm Marco Salm, working for C40 Cities Finance Facility, and I have the honor and pleasure to moderate today's session. So before we go to the agenda, please have a quick look at our panel. I would like to introduce you to our panel, and Dr.Sandra Wappelhorst with us. She's a senior researcher at International Council on Clean Transportation, ICCT. Her research focus is on fiscal and non-fiscal policies to enhance electric vehicle adoption. As well, with us on the panel, we have Sigurd Magnusson. He's a senior advisor at the Ministry of Transport in New Zealand, and he has led the policy development regarding incentivizing EVs in New Zealand over the last 12 months. Finally, the panel is complemented by Sutanu Pati. He's a project advisor and a corporate professional with interests in policy and financial and procurement aspects of e-mobility, and he's based in Mumbai, India. So thanks a lot to the panelists to be on this call and to share your experience and expertise on this topic. So before we go into the panel and the topics, please, I would like to share with you the agenda of today's call. So we have the first presentation, fiscal instruments to drive low emission vehicle purchase in Asia, by Sandra Wappelhorst, providing an insight into her research on this topic. Then we have a practical hands-on experience from Sigurd Magnusson on electric vehicle policies and adoption in New Zealand. And finally, complementing with the experience from Sutanu Pati on the deployment of EVs in India and Indonesia. So before I give the virtual floor to Sandra, I would like to invite as well the audience to share, to raise your questions to the panel in the chat box, and we will answer these towards the end of the session. So thanks so much for as well to the audience for being actively involved. And so now I would like to open the virtual floor to Sandra Wappelhorst to provide her presentation on fiscal instruments to drive low emission vehicle purchases in Asia. Thank you, Sandra. The floor is yours.
Tax for expensive cars. And so there are quite a few taxes on registration or on vehicle purchase. Also common are ownership taxes, here called automobile tax, which are regular payable taxes for owning a vehicle. And some markets also provide one-time subsidies, a car purchase for low or zero emission vehicles. And on the right, you can see the parameters to determine those taxes. And that includes CO2 emissions, fuel consumptions, emissions of other pollutants, weight, age, price, engine size, and fuel type. And so it shows in the diamond shapes in the purchase taxes, and in the triangle shape, the ownership taxes. And we can see from the table that in the 18 markets, it's mostly on engine size, but all the other aspects like CO2 emissions, fuel consumption is less common, fuel type. So it's mostly engine size for the determination of the vehicle taxes. Next slide. And we did analyze the impact of various taxes on consumer ownership costs. We did that over a period of 6 years. You can see here again on the left, the 18 different markets. On the bottom, the consumer ownership cost over 6 years in US dollar, and listed here the key taxes. We have the base price. We assume the same base price as the vehicle models here, the Nissan Leaf, battery electric vehicle Nissan Leaf, and the taxes and costs not available in all markets, so the same price. We have import duty, we show VIT, one-time taxes, which are various taxes as presented before, annual tax and fuel electricity price. And we can see the different effects of these taxes in the different markets. So very common is value-added tax. Import duty in some countries, one-time taxes are particularly high in Indonesia, also Singapore. Annual vehicle taxes play a less important role in terms of adding to the 6-year consumer ownership costs. So when we look here at the battery electric Nissan Leaf, we can see how different vehicle taxation works in these Asian markets. And in the next slide, we compare what we have seen in the previous slide, the battery electric Nissan Leaf, and compare it to gasoline Toyota Corolla, and the difference over 6 years. So here in the bars, all the taxes and the base price are summed up. And the blue line shows that the battery electric vehicle, the Nissan Leaf, is about $11,000 higher than the comparable gasoline Toyota Corolla. And the red bars indicate for the different markets in Asia how much more the expensive an electric vehicle would be compared to a BEV model. And we see that in 14 markets, the BEV model is more expensive, particularly in Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Australia. We have 4 markets where the battery electric vehicle model would be cost competitive or cheaper compared to the gasoline model we choose for our analysis, and this mainly due to subsidies or also tax incentives. Next slide. And here, as the final slide, I would like to show as an example Sweden, how tax changes can influence the sale of low-emission vehicles. And in this slide, you can see on the x-axis the monthly registrations from January 2018 to April 2021 for plug-in hybrid electric cars, which is light blue, and battery electric cars in dark blue, and those are new registrations per month based on all new passenger car registrations in Sweden. And when we look to the left, the first box in July 2018, the country introduced a so-called bonus malus tax scheme. That means introducing a bonus for low-emission vehicle purchases, like battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and on the other side, taxing high-emitting vehicles to counterfinance the bonus. And after the introduction, we can see that the share in July 2018 of battery and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles reached almost 20%, kind of remained stable at about 15% prior to the introduction of the bonus malus. We can see that the shares of battery and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles kind of decreased. So a lot of consumers opted for an ICE vehicle, but afterwards we can see stable developments. Then we see another peak, particularly in the middle in January 2020, which is largely driven by tighter CO2 emission standards at the European level, but also tax changes. So the tighter CO2 emission levels for new passenger cars resulted in more vehicle models on the market. But what is also interesting, in April 2021, further to the right, the bonus was increased for zero-emission vehicles, and so battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and decreased for plug-in hybrid vehicles. And Sweden, which is usually more a country or where a lot of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles were registered, and we can see now also with the change that more battery electric cars are also being registered. So we see a continuous uptake of electric vehicle purchases, and here now also specifically battery electric vehicles. And we also see these effects in other markets, that taxes, that national taxes have a significant effect on vehicle purchases of zero and low emission vehicle purchases, and stimulate consumers. So taxation policies are an important instrument how the market can be developed and to further spur the electrification of the fleet, and by that also lower transport-related emissions. That's on my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra, for providing this very good overview as a start to the session. I think the overview on all the taxes that relate on vehicles already indicates at the same time like a kind of a toolbox, fiscal policy toolbox that could be used to facilitate EV uptake. At the same time, I really like this last overview, which clearly indicates how tax policy influences consumer decisions. So thank you so much for presenting your study findings. I'm now happy to move forward and to invite Sigurd Magnusson from the Ministry of Transport to share his experience on incentivizing EVs in New Zealand with us. And there we go as well. So the virtual floor is yours, Sigurd. Please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone from New Zealand. So New Zealand will present a case study on how moving from a market that has been unregulated to one that is both regulated and incentivized, and how this creates very quick results in terms of higher sales rates of electric vehicles. Next slide. So just to begin with, in terms of the overview for our country, we are very much targeting the 1.5 Celsius ambition with the Paris Agreement. And that's because in New Zealand, 43% of our CO2 emissions come from transport. And so we are looking to reduce our transport CO2 emissions 41% over the next 13 years. And at a broad level, quite recently in the last 2 years, we have put in place legislation for targeting net zero emissions by 2050. And so that covers all sectors of the economy. We also have an emissions trading scheme, which is quite similar to the United Kingdom. And so that sets a price on well, in this case, of transport, the use of petrol and diesel. Next slide. So in terms of where we need to get to, in terms of reducing that transport CO2, 41% reduction is very different to the business as usual. So you can see from the graph there that yes, there will be reductions out to 2035, but we don't get the target that we need. And so over the last year or so, New Zealand has put in place quite a lot of policies that I'll talk about today. I'll mostly focus really on what is pushing electric vehicle uptake, but just to make a clear point too, that New Zealand is also pursuing the use of biofuels, increasing the use of walking, cycling, public transport, rethinking how we design our cities, and generally just reducing vehicle use. And so the target that we need is very much provided for through EVs, but EVs by themselves won't be enough. So to get to 41%, we need about 1/3 of our entire vehicle fleet to be zero emission in 2035. So that's not just 30% of sales, that's all the vehicles in New Zealand right now. We need 1/3 of them to move to zero emissions over the next 13 years. Next slide. So the first part that we have put in, and this was enacted just February this year, so it was so soon that it was not part of Sandra's study, is putting in very high ambition regulations. So a lot of markets have CO2 or fuel consumption regulations, and New Zealand's regulations target about a 2/3 reduction over the next 5-6 years. So they will start next year, and importers will be subject to reaching those targets, and if they do not reach those targets, they'll be facing a financial penalty, much like you might find through Europe. I've got different targets for passenger and commercial vehicles, and quite a lot of similarities to the sorts of policies you might see in other major markets. As well as that, New Zealand does not place road user charges, or there's no road tax on the use of electric vehicles, so that saves EV owners money each year. And we also have a number of policies around government use and public transport. Buses must all be zero emission sales from 2025. The government has put in place public education campaigns. And as I touched on earlier, we have an emissions trading scheme that currently has a price of carbon about New Zealand 76, which is approximately $50 US. Next slide. So to better visualize this, you can see how our targets relate to those of other countries. Now, it's a bit of a busy slide, but you can see the dark blue line superimposed on the lines of other countries shows that New Zealand has previously had very high CO2 emissions for its vehicles. And that's because it was unregulated. One of the few countries that has been unregulated. And so the targets that we have set have been to catch up with leading markets such as the United States and the European Union by 2026, and actually to enact targets that are stronger than those areas the following year in 2027. Now we expect in 2027 that those other markets will have set stricter targets still, but at the moment New Zealand has one of the strictest trajectories out to the next 5 years. Next slide. So that's on the regulation side. Now I want to talk a wee bit about the what we call a fee bait, or the financial incentive side facing consumers. So similar to Sweden, which was talked about before, vehicles starting in April are assessed based on their CO2 emissions, and if they are below a certain point, then the consumer receives money back from the government in the form of a rebate. And if the vehicle is above a certain CO2 amount and contributes more significantly to climate change, then the consumer has to pay a one-off fee. And that's based on a per gram amount. So if a vehicle is 1 or 2 grams different to another vehicle, then there will be perhaps $100 difference in terms of the rebate or the charge. And so that encourages consumers to buy the cleanest car, the lowest CO2 car they can. Importantly, the charges or the fees that we collect as a government from the high polluting vehicles, they fund the rebates. And so that makes the policy durable. It means that we will obviously have to change what the rebate and the fee sides are from year to year. But it ensures that we can have this policy not be a cost on the government or taxpayers. We've got a couple of other little elements in there. So we provide an extra bonus if the vehicle is absolutely zero emission. And we also cap the benefit for a plug-in hybrid, because below a certain point, plug-in hybrids don't really provide additional climate benefit. Next slide. We've also made it mandatory that vehicles for sale show a star rating for CO2 and show the fee or the rebate available, and that helps drive consumer awareness. You can visit the rightcar.gov.nz website to look at what a particular amount might be on a car you're aware of. Next slide. New Zealand has a strong EV charger network. So we have about 80% today and about 100% renewable electricity grid that we're targeting in 2030. And the government has funded about 50% of that. And almost all of the highway network now has fast chargers. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the results. So New Zealand has seen quicker than we expected improvement. So the electric vehicle, including plug-in hybrid sales, have gone from only 3% in 2020 to 8% last year. And then for the last couple of months, we've seen 20% share in the new passenger market. So a great number of new models, brands have been coming in. And now what we're seeing is a lengthening wait time. And so that's a challenge for us now to focus. But the policy has been immediately noticed in the market. Next slide. We see quite significant boundary effects. So you can see in the left-hand graph a huge spike, and that's the sale rise of hyperlooting vehicles just before charges were imposed. But on the right-hand side, you can see that for the last 10 years, there has been a very small level of decline in average CO2 emissions. And then in the last 6 to 8 months, we've seen a really significant reduction. And that's because of this, shift from 3 to 8 to 20% market share of EVs in the new passenger segment. Next slide. So I just wanted to finish off by saying New Zealand is very happy to work with others around exchanging information and policy insights and working together. We've certainly taken a lot of information from other countries that have been leaders. We're happy to share that information and like to just acknowledge and I guess encourage both manufacturers and regulators putting in high ambition policies that will bring about a rapid shift of EVs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sigurd, for showcasing this or for presenting this kind of a roadmap for EV uptake, and as well, I think the bonus malus system you presented is very nice to indicate. I mean, with a rebate for EVs and at the same time where additional fees apply to those cars with not being EVs, and then just to see that there is no addition in an ideal scenario, there's no additional funding needed, as this kind of could be in a balanced way, at least at the beginning of this road you have taken. So thanks so much for this insights, and it's quite good to see that as well the market pattern, that this how the market is adopting to the incentives that have been set in New Zealand. So thanks so much for your insights you shared. And now coming to Sutanu Pati, thanks so much for as well be on the panel. And Sutanu worked in the past with CFF, the C40 Cities Finance Facility, on deploying electric buses in India and Indonesia, and I'm very happy to have you here on this panel to share your expertise on a more broader topic, the electric vehicle deployment in India and Indonesia. Thanks so much. The virtual floor is yours, Sutanu.
Yep. Thank you, Marco. I hope you're hearing me okay.
Very good.
So here we quickly present the differences in the policies of two countries, that is India and Indonesia, and we show the collective effect of the national and provincial policies on the EV deployment. So let's start with the goals first. So in Indonesia, the national goal was first set in 2017, and then now it's been revised. And as for the revised goals, Indonesia wants to have 2 million EVs by 2030 and additional 13 million two-wheelers by 2030, and also 10% of the public transport fleet to be electrified by 2025. And as recently announced, the country wants to become net zero by 2060. And if we talk about the provincial goal of Jakarta, the capital region of Jakarta, so they are going to procure only electric buses for the public transport from 2025, and a major part of the city will be declared as zero emission by 2030. Now, if we compare these goals to the goals of India, so the national goal here has been to promote the production and sale of electric vehicles to the extent of 30% of cars, 70% of commercial vehicles, and 80% of two and three wheelers will be electric by 2030. And during the same time, the government of India also wants to convert or electrify 30% of the public transport bus fleet, and also additionally installed 400,000 charging stations to serve the electric vehicles, and the country wants to become net zero by 2070. In addition, the capital region of New Delhi, they have their own goal of making Delhi also the EV capital of India and accelerate the pace of EV adoption. So like many populated cities in the world, Delhi also suffers from a problem of air pollution, especially during certain months of the year. So they want to promote the use of environment-friendly vehicles, and so they hope, or they target that 25% of all new registrations in New Delhi will be electric by 2024. The next slide, please. So now let's look at the policy tools that have been deployed by the respective governments to achieve these goals. In Indonesia, the national policy allows import of electric vehicle parts and incompletely knocked down electric vehicles free of import duty. And at the same time, the luxury goods tax, the local sales tax, has also been waived for the electric vehicles. There is a new licensing scheme for charging the electric vehicles as well as for setting up battery swapping stations. A favorable electricity tariff has been announced, which is almost 50% of the regular tariff, which is between 5.5 to 12 US cents. But at the same time, there is also differential pricing of the fossil fuel, which is available for public transport, particularly diesel. And the diesel available for public transport is priced almost at 50% of the diesel which is purchased by for use in private vehicles. So this kind of adversely impacts the deployment of electric vehicles, especially in public transport. Now, if we look at the national policy of India, Government of India has announced a very large scheme for providing capital subsidy to the extent of 1.36 billion US dollars, and this will be provided during the years 2019 till 2024, and 1 million two-wheelers will receive the capital subsidies in addition to 550,000 three and four-wheelers, and also 7,000 electric buses will receive significant amount of subsidies under this program. And in addition, US dollars 133 million has been set aside for setting up the charging infrastructure to charge these vehicles as well. And to provide further boost and reduce the cost of these vehicles, the government will also provide production-linked incentive between 13 and 18% to the auto component and battery manufacturers for these electric vehicles. There is no license required in India to set up the EV charging infrastructure. Further, there are income tax concessions for individual taxpayers who purchase electric vehicles on loan. And the local tax, goods and service tax, is levied at the lowest slab of 5% for electric vehicles, for the vehicles which are manufactured in India. And also all the electric vehicles are exempted from commercial permit requirement, which needs to be obtained for the fossil fuel commercial vehicles. So there are plenty of things to go for or to promote the electric vehicles. Next slide, please. In the provincial policy in Indonesia, the government of DKI Jakarta has already approved induction of 100 buses on pilot basis, of which 30 buses I think are already flying since February 2022. There is operational subsidy provided, but this is the case for ICE buses also. So both ICE buses and electric buses receive operational subsidy to meet the gap between the cost and the revenue. And the motorized vehicle tax and the title transport tax for the electric vehicles has been reduced significantly in Jakarta. If we talk about New Delhi, in addition to the national subsidy program, the government of Delhi has also introduced additional incentives for purchase of electric vehicles of all categories, mainly 2- and 3-wheelers or cars. There is also scrapping incentive for converting the auto rickshaws and other 3-wheelers from ICE vehicles to electric. And the manufacturer is also required to provide a matching contribution. So that further reduces the cost of electrifying the existing vehicles. The government has is also providing a 5% interest subsidy on the loans which are taken for financing the electric vehicles. Road tax and registration fees have been waived. Electric vehicle board and the EV cell has been set up, and public outreach programs are being conducted to provide awareness of the electric vehicles. Skill development centers, recycling ecosystem for the batteries are also being set up. The government has also set up a state EV fund, which will collect taxes from the polluting vehicles, and this amount will be utilized to provide subsidy and encourage the deployment of the electric vehicles. And the electricity tariff is also quite attractive, between 5.3 US cents to 6 US cents for charging the electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So now we see the effect of these national and provincial policies on the actual outcomes. So if we see in Indonesia, about 1,900 electric cars have been sold till June 2021. 15,000 electric 2-wheelers were sold in 2019. About 185 charging units have been deployed up to November 2021. And provincially, we have seen that 30 e-buses have been deployed for public transport by transport so far. Whereas if we look at India, the EV sales in the financial year ending March 2022 was more than 400,000 vehicles, and this is almost or more than 3 times the number of EVs sold in the previous year. So far, 1 million or more than 1 million electric vehicles have been registered, and 1,400 charging points have been installed, and more are being installed as we speak, because the government has instructed all the government-owned oil distribution companies to set up EV charging points at the gas station. So this will ensure that we will have a countrywide network, not only in the cities, but also on the highways for charging electric vehicles. In the province of New Delhi, Delhi has already registered a 10% rate for registration of EVs as compared to the total number of vehicles in the last year. And their target is to reach 25% by 2025. So they seem to be on track. In terms of public transport, already 600 buses have been procured. Most of them have been deployed on the road. Another 1,600 buses, the procurement is almost complete. And this was actually part of a very unique procurement. 5 cities, including Delhi, got together and combined their requirements to a large order of 5,500 electric buses. And as a result, they achieved significant reduction in the cost per kilometer, between 15% to 48% as compared to their previous procurement. So these are very good signs, especially for India and New Delhi to achieve penetration of electric vehicles. And we see that focus on providing policy incentives, both fiscal and non-fiscal, has worked quite well. And then the EV deployment has taken, is on a path, right path. And I think the government stands to exceed all the expectations set already. So yeah, that's all for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sutanu. I think this has very nicely shown, you very nicely have shown that, I mean, we have to consider the national, but as well the provincial and maybe even the municipal level on CO2 emission targets and as well incentives, fiscal policy incentives for, you know, facilitating the EV uptake. And as well, I think this comparative perspective has very nicely shown that, you know, where the fiscal policy instruments are used, this has an impact on EV deployment. So thanks so much for your comparative perspective on Indonesia and India. So now I would like to go to the Q&A session of this, and let me go out of the presentation mode quickly, just to have the chance to have a look in the chat box. So I hope we have received some of the questions from the audience, and let's see whether we can take those questions. Sigurd, Sandra, and Sutanu, have you? So maybe starting with Sutanu, do you have any figures on the average mileage of E2W in comparison to conventional two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers in comparison to conventional two-wheelers?
Yeah, actually, to answer this question in a generic way will be difficult, but if I look at the spectrum of the two-wheelers using petrol as a fuel, I think we can see anywhere between 60 kilometers to almost 70 or 80 kilometers to a liter, depending on the power of the vehicle. But again, when it comes to electric vehicles, again, it will depend on the power of the vehicle and the size of the vehicle. But generally, I think we can get easily about 15 kilometers per unit of electricity for some of the electric vehicles.
Excellent. So there's one additional question that has been raised from the audience on, do you have different requirements for compulsory roadworthiness inspections for electric motorbikes in comparison to ICE motorbikes? And what is your recommendation on this?
I do not have specific knowledge on this technical aspect of electric vehicles.
Excellent. And then there've been as well one question raised to you, Sandra. So why is the base cost of the Nissan in South Korea so much lower than in all the other countries? So maybe this might be difficult to answer, but maybe you have an answer on this.
No, it's an easy answer.
Okay.
So they have a subsidy of about yes, $6,000 US, and we reduce the price. It's the way we do the visualization, that we basically reduce the base price based on the subsidy. That's also true for the other countries, but not so significant for those countries which have a subsidy. In India, the vehicle model we choose would not receive a subsidy, so there's a subsidy as well. This is how we do the calculations, how we visualize this. So this is why it's reduced by so much. So, and it helps to reduce the overall cost and also makes it comparable or even cheaper than a comparable gasoline car would be.
Excellent. And Sigurd, do you have something else to add? Please feel free. So there is no like specific question to you, Sigurd, but if you have something to add, please feel free to compliment.
Yeah, I think just to to reiterate that there's a lot of information out there. There's lots of really great best practices out there, and just really to encourage both, the regulators and the manufacturers to move ahead. It's quite surprising how quickly the changes can come about. So very much encourage that ambition.
Excellent. So let me briefly share some conclusions of and takeaways from this session. I think, and I hope we transferred this very nicely, that we have showcased that fiscal policies really make a difference on EV uptake, and there was on decarbonizing urban transportation, reduce air pollution and associated health costs, and I think as has been very nicely shown, clear targets at national level and subnational level are needed. I mean, public transport makes up a huge share of overall CO2 emissions. I would say, from my experience, 1/3 up to, as indicated in the New Zealand case, 43% of total CO2 emissions. So addressing this with specific targets, the transport sector, is very important. Then as well, I think Sandra has very nicely shown that there is a lot of taxes that apply on vehicles so far, and on the fuel consumption, emission, weight, age, price, size of the car, and so forth. And this as well indicates some of the fiscal policy instruments at hand within the national context in order to incentivize EVs. As well, I think we have seen that some countries are still in their infancy in Asia when it comes to setting the fiscal policies in order to facilitate the uptake of EVs. I think this is something that we could showcase during our presentations, and as well. I would say that we have very nicely shown throughout the three presentations that the purchase incentives, tax incentives have an impact on consumer decision making. Then now I see, so this is maybe just to sum up and conclude, but now I see maybe we take this last question to Sigurd on New Zealand imports. Many second-hand cars. Has this been a challenge in taxation and standards policy? So maybe you could address this question as well raised from the audience. Thanks so much.
Yeah, happy to. So not really, no. We've included all the used import vehicles in the same CO2 regulations, and they also receive the same, well, they receive price incentives and disincentives as well. So we ensure that the entire market is affected by the policy, and that rides all the way up to the highest ambition too. So New Zealand at COP26 has joined other countries to call for the end of internal combustion engine vehicles next decade. For light vehicles 2035, 2040, sort of the time frame, heavy vehicles 2040, and so we would include used imports in those same high-level ambitions as well as down in the regulation. So otherwise you will get a shift from one part to the market if consumers can see that they can escape the policy.
Excellent. And maybe like two final comments from my side. I think we have now very nicely showcased the transport sector and the fiscal policy instruments, and at the same time I think there has to be a complementary policy strategy for cleaner energy, setting greening the electricity grid. I think especially in the context of Asia, to really decarbonize the public transport sector. Otherwise, EV won't solve the problem. So this has to be a complementary strategy, and I think as well looking at the tax system, which is something I'm very interested about. I think in the long run, and there's a lot of discussion about it in the long run, I think deeper reforms of tax systems might be needed, as if, for instance, the tax on vehicles is no longer providing the revenues, stable and plannable revenues to the government, as they are not applicable on EVs, then this has, of course, impact on the revenue side of the government. So I think this is so now coming to the end of this session. I think we as well might have run out of time. Sorry for that. I lost a bit out of sight the time as we started with some delay. Thanks so much, first of all, to the panelists for sharing your experience and expertise. Thanks so much to the audience for the questions that have been raised. And yeah, hopefully we could further, go into this topic as we have showcased. This is a very important topic to consider. Thanks so much for your participation. And now I would hand over back to the studio. Thanks so much.